There we go.
I will share.
You want me to share the screen, don't you?
Yeah, I've just sent you a request.
There you go.
Let's see
if everybody goes to Robert's picture at the top and click on the three little dots, you'll be able to pin him center screen. I'll just keep on letting people in.
Yeah.
So over to you, Rob.
Right. Can you see that then?
Yeah. Perfect.
Right then. Let me close that off. Well, thanks, Derek, for the invite and everybody for tuning in. Before I start tying some flies, I thought I would kind of touch on the philosophy behind the patterns themselves, in the hope that it will add a bit of context to the various choices of hackles and silks and dubbins and everything when we get to dressing the flies. Then, of course, later when I'm dressing the flies, I'll add to these points, on material selections, fly tying techniques. I think it's important for any demonstration to focus on technique rather than on pattern, because demonstrating a fly pattern really tells you nothing, but demonstrating a technique and a methodology of tying the flies kind of tells you everything, because that methodology and the techniques are interchangeable as you dress different patterns. So I thought I'd address techniques rather than patterns. Having said that, I'll give you the recipe for the patterns. So first of all, it's important to state that the traditional North Country spiders have entomology at the very core. It's never been a simple chuck it and chance it style of fishing. All the traditional patterns were dressed to imitate very particular insect families. And you can see here with the jewel crooks and the March browns from 1848, the keying into specific insects. And this knowledge of entomology spreads throughout all the manuscripts and all the publications that you get. And it's where fly dressings are listed into monthly hatch charts. And flies are fished in teams. This knowledge of entomology was brought into play when constructing their casts or their teams of flies. On the casts, the flies are grouped together in probably about 3 or 4 fly casts. Some people used to fish as many as 7 and 8 flies on a cast. And it was to match the most prevalent insect hatches on that particular month and that particular condition of the river. Sometimes, of course, individual patterns on the cast were swapped, but that team of flies and their interconnection with the hatch cycle never changed. Fly casts were built around river conditions and the dominant hatches. And in the manuscripts, you often see remarks about certain flies being consistent on certain river conditions, when the river's high, on low water, high summer. It's all there in the manuscripts. And an example of this entomology can be seen here in Sylvester Lister's manuscript. And here he gives 3 early season patterns for February and March, and then he reapplies them again in September. And this is where Lister's knowledge of entomology and his right reading of nature comes into play. So if we look at number 2 here, the dark Bloa, which is sometimes called, well, it's now called the water hen Bloa, is a representation of the large dark olive. And Lister knows that the large dark olive has 2 key emergence periods throughout the year. Its first key emergence is during the early months of the season in February and March, and then it kind of disappears. And then in September, it comes back again with a key emergence. So he knows this. He's got a thorough understanding of the insects on his river, similar to number 1, the winter brown or the early red. This again, this is an interpretation of the willow fly, and it has its emergence in September. but then trails on through the winter months into the opening of the following new season. So anglers like Lister knew that the stonefly that they saw in March and February was the exact same one in September. So they had this key knowledge of entomology, and they were more, I say, susceptible to nature than what we are today. But of course, it gets even more sophisticated than that. And here we have the pot blower and the olive blower, which ostensibly are the same pattern. But you can see here, of course, that the olive blower has purposely been dressed with an orange head. And this is to represent the eyes of the male insect, the male Batis. And you see this purposeful use of different coloured heads on numerous North Country flies. You see heads of peacock herl and magpie herl on needle flies. And this is to represent the eyes of the needle flies and stoneflies and that quite large thoracic area that you get on needle flies. There's also flies that have dubbed heads. You'll have just a normal silk body, but the head will be dubbed. We dub generally with a ruddy brown dubbing, sometimes foxier. And this again is trying to represent the eyes of the male Batis, the male insect. So you can see there's a level of sophistication going on here. The dressings might seem simplistic, but there's a century-old reading of nature at play. And there's also a scientific appraisal of fly selection. So how does this relate to dressing the flies? Well, it stands to reason that if they were going into this level of detail about the natural insect and the emphasis on entomology and imitation, then they would be equally as assiduous in the choice of time materials. So the importance of the correct hackle selection, correct dubbings, and choice of shades of silk was paramount to them from both practical and philosophical reasons. And it goes without saying, they were fastidious in their choice of hackles. This here is Thackeray's notes and lists at the bottom of one of his manuscripts, where he goes into all the feathers that he's using. So it's not only.
Sorry, Rob. Is there a slide I'm missing there? You seem to be referring to a picture, and I can see you, but no slide. Am I missing something?
No, I don't know.
Oh, okay, sorry. No, my mistake.
Well, no.
Apologies. I thought you were showing us a picture. I can only see you.
No, I am showing you a picture.
Oh, I can see you and that lovely background you've got of all those pictures.
Can I interrupt? Yep. If you go to Rob's picture where you can see Rob, click on the three little dots and you'll be able to pin it because he's sharing the screen.
Gotcha. My mistake. Thank you.
Not a problem. Do you want me to go back?
No, I'm the mug here. Don't stop for me. Carry on, please.
So as I say, it goes without saying that they're fastidious in their choice of choice of hackles. And here we've got Thackeray's list of hackles, and he's not only keen into particular species of birds, which part of the bird the hackle comes from, but it's also important. He's all playing importance about the age of the bird and the sex of the bird. Things like partridge hackles that had to be speckled rather than barred. When they use woodcock feathers for the winter brown, the hackle had to be turned in a particular direction. So they're very specific about the hackles, and they go to great lengths to get strange hackles. Sea grouse, I mean, that's a common term. Green linnet, golden thrush, I don't even know what a golden thrush is. Water pigeon, what the hell's a water pigeon? I don't know. Things like this, these are pult hackles from a grouse chick, and the grouse chick has to be less than a week old to get this shade of hackle. So they're very particular in the hackles that they're picking up. Here we've got some feathers for a dark needle, which requires starling feathers taken from the hinder part of the wing where it joins the body. And as he says, there are only 4 feathers on each side. So the idea that they just used whatever hackle they could find is nonsense, really. They were fastidious in the choice of hackles because their philosophy was based on accurate imitation, which of course is bad news for us modern fly tyers because we've got to somehow work out substitutes for these strangely named hackles that they're using. And of course, it's not just hackles that they're meticulous about. They're also fastidious in their choice of silks. Silks were chosen purposely and waxed to various degrees in order to achieve a particular shade. And this shade had to represent the natural insect. So the choice of silks and how they handle the silk and how they wax the silk is also paramount to them with a finished fly. But of course, that doesn't mean that a certain brand of silk was relied upon. Everybody mentions Purcells. I've lost count of how many times I've been at the BFFI and people have told me that Purcells was the traditional silk for these flies. Well, that's nonsense. Here we've got William Bromfit's material book. Bromfit is the man that dresses the flies for Pritts' famous book. And you can see here that his silk numbers don't correspond to any Purcell shade. You've got orange, which is a shade 51. You've got orange, another shade of orange, which is a shade 49. Yellow, which is 47. So these shades don't correspond to Purcells because Purcells wasn't important. The brand of silk was never important. It was the look of the finished fly that was paramount. I mean, so if Charles Jardine wants to dress his spiders with uni or Daima thread, good luck to him because it's the finished fly that's important, not the brand of silk that you're using. For me, on some patterns, I use Unithread. If I haven't got that particular shade that I'm after, Unithread's good for me. And of course, when we look at the flies, we see that they're totally different to our modern creations. And you can see here, these are some of Nat Hunt flies from about 1910. Look totally different to the modern flies that you would see, you know, at fly tying shows and what you see online. They weren't sparsely dressed, as we often hear, but they were, in fact, more heavily dressed and more heavily hackled. We always talk about a misting of dubbing. That's more or less a modern affectation. The dubbings were more, the flies were more heavily dubbed and more heavily hackled, as you can see here. This one's from 1849, I think it is. And the often quoted rule that you hear that it's not really a traditional North Country spider unless it's, you know, should only have 2 turns of hackle. That's a fiction. That's a modern fiction. Hackle turns were judged on the profile of the insect that they were trying to imitate and the quality of the hackle that they were using, rather than some, you know, imaginary hard and fast rule. Hackles were taken from different parts of a bird and different species of a bird, and they subtly give you a different look to your finished fly. So each individual fly was judged on its own characteristics and its own merits. So when someone tells you that, you know, if it's got more than 12 hackle barbs, it's not a traditional North Country spider, that's complete nonsense, because they haven't taken into account the type of hackle that they're using and the quality of the hackle they're using. And more importantly, they haven't taken into account the profile of the insect that they're trying to imitate. And of course, we get to the length of hackles. Traditionally, the hackles were generally a lot longer than what we see today. And that is because the hackle is dressed to represent the wings and legs of an adult insect. And you see this on numerous flies where the hackles are a lot longer than you would expect. And that's because the flies aren't dressed to represent nymphs or even emergers. The fact that they could cover an emerger is a happy accident. It's not a process of design. These flies were dressed to imitate adult insects when they're trapped in the surface film, or when they're dying, or when they're just sat on the surface. Now, having said all that, some hackles were deliberately clipped to size. And you don't see this anymore. But if you go through some of the old manuscripts and some of the old fly wallies, you see loads of hackles that are deliberately clipped to size. And something like this is Mr. Shane will know this one. This is a smoke fly from the 1890s, and you can clearly see that the hackles have been clipped, or more probably it's more accurate to say they've been pinched rather than clipped. And another technique they used on some flies was to deliberately set the fly in order to achieve a greater representation of an adult insect. And you can see this practice here where on the top, the hackle at the top is longer than the one at the bottom, because that bottom hackle is deliberately being clipped in order to make it look like legs. So this practice, along with trimming hackles, now largely forgotten. I mean, if you sat next to Oliver Edwards at a fly tying show and started clipping your hackles, you would get the brunt of his rough tongue, let's put it that way. And another kind of layer of sophistication with the patterns is the parochial terms that they use. You know, these names, Bloas and Watchets, which I'll come to later when I address a few. Even terms like twisted, you see in some of the books where there's two silks twisted together. But that doesn't mean twisted in the sense that what we understand. When you see in the manuscripts and it says two silks twisted, it actually means twisted, it means wrapped. So the two silks are wrapped in tandem. They are not twisted together. This is because when you see the finished flies, it has a segmented look to it. Now, if you twisted those silks and then wrapped them around the hook shank, you'd get a chevron type of effect rather than a segmentation. And when you have a look at the old flies and the illustrations of the old flies, that chevron effect is not there. It's because the flies are wrapped around the silk is wrapped around the hook shank in tandem, giving you that segmentation. And as I say, I'll touch on this when I address something like this, a Dark Watchet. And I was talking to Lars earlier on, who some of you may know, and we were talking about hook scales, the Pennell scale, which is the new scale, versus the Redditch scale and the old scale. And a lot of fog surrounds the North Country flies because you've got these strange scales, 00 and 000 and ones and threes. And people, it's kind of like a barrier to some people because they get confused with these old ancient hook scales. And what it is, we've got the Pennell scale, which is the new scale, versus the old scale, which is the Redditch scale. Now, daft as it sounds, the Redditch scale is actually the new scale, and the Pennell scale is the old traditional scale. So if we were looking at our flies today, in the old scale, a number 3 would equate to our modern 12. And a number 2 would equate to, if we had one, a modern 13. A number 1 would be a 14, a 00 would be a 16, and a 000 would be an 18. So we have this complication of hooks, but it also gets even more complicated because some fly tyers we're using Limerick bend hooks. Some, of course, we're using Sneck bend hooks. And a size 14 Limerick bend is totally different to a size 14 Sneck bend because the sweep of the Limerick bend actually adds length to the hook. So I think it was John Glynn said that the flies were smaller than people expected because they were dressed on Sneck bend hooks. So the North Country patterns where you see them dressed on Sneck bends are actually probably a size smaller than our modern size now. So if we were going to say a 1 equal to 14, and you're looking at the old manuscripts, and 1 would probably now equal 16 because they're using a Sneck bend rather than our normal Hamilton bends or a Limerick bend. That's probably complicated, Alfie. So hopefully you can see there are nuances and hidden sophistications to these flies. sophistications which we can add to, with our techniques, with our fly tying techniques. And of course, that's going to be where the fun starts, is when we start to getting into the fly tying. So if I can get in to that. Are you still with me?
No, you still got the Wharfdale flies up. There we go.
Yeah, you go. So what I'm going to do is, if I can move that to that. Right.
Zoom in on your voice.
I am doing. There we go. We're there.
Perfect.
There we go. So, how's it looking in the vise?
Perfect.
Yeah. Right. So the first pattern I'm going to dress is, well, we'll start with the easy ones, is a water hen blower. And as I say, that this is to represent the large dark olive. And even though ostensibly it's an easy pattern to dress, people get it wrong. People get it very wrong sometimes. And what I'm going to dress is, when you see the old patterns, it says yellow silk. Some people say you have to tie it with primrose silk, but you look at the old manuscripts and the old books, primrose silk is never mentioned. It's always yellow silk. So what I'm going to do is, I'll do the Oliver Edwards method of tying it in, and I'll tie the hackle in first. So I'm going to come in directly behind the eye of the hook, and I'm going to trap that silk in with 4 to 5 nice turns of silk. And even better, I'm going to put my fly dressing glasses on, and I can see. Brilliant. So the choice of the hackle here for the water hen blower is really imperative. When you're looking at the undercoverts of the water hen, some say there's only 4 to 5 hackles you can use, but there isn't. You can use them all. But what you got to look out for is things like this, and it's got these wisps at the end. You can't really see it as well, but let me move my light in a bit. And you want to avoid hackles with these kind of wispy bits at the end. What you want is a hackle that is more pronounced at the end. These doesn't have the wispy bits to it. And like any North Country hackle, we're going to expose our tip. But of course, what we want to do is kind of judge the finished hackle length that we require, which is there. I'm happy with that. And I'm going to come in and just create a nice little tag end.
What size hook, Rob?
Yeah. It's a vintage Purcell's, even though I just spent 5 minutes telling you that Purcell's wasn't important. I've tied it with Unithread, doesn't really matter. And now I trap that tag end in, and I'm coming down the hook shank in nice tight turns. And I hope you can see that as I'm coming down that hook shank, that hook is rotating in the vise, which is telling me that I've got perfect thread tension on the hook. Because as my thread is going round and round, that hook should follow it. So I've got a nice key thread tension. And I'm going to finish somewhere between the point of the hook and the end of the barb. Now, traditionally the pattern was dressed using this, which is water wrap, and you can see the guard hairs, and you see it's quite brown. It starts to look like mole when you tease into it and go into the underfur. So if you want to substitute for this, I'd go for something like muskrat. Muskrat's a good sub. But with muskrat, you've got really spiky guard hairs with a muskrat, so you've got to tease those guard hairs out a little bit, and it'll give you more of a look of water rat. You could use, as I say, the average substitute is mole, but seeing as I've got water rat, I might as well use it. And there's a trick to dub in the fly. You really want, if we're tying it in a modern sense, you don't want as much dubbing on. And what you can do is attach your dubbing and then slowly just tease it back a bit and start to fret it out. You can fret it out with your fingernail, and then start to twist. And now what you often see with people's dressings of the water hen blower is that because they can't dub properly, they open the turns of the thread, trying to give an illusion of a sparse dubbing. But of course, that just means that the fly is going to fall to bits. So just get a nice smoky haze to the dubbing, and then make sure that when you take your thread wraps back up the hook shank, you do it in nice, tight, touching turns. You don't open those thread wraps. You just keep them nice and tight. I'll take a bit more dubbing, huh? And then you start working your way up. And now everybody say, "Oh, it's too much dubbing." But you can just come in with your fingers and your fingernail, and you can start to take that dubbing off. And because I've missed a bit at the front, I can bang the dubbing back on there and keep going. And as I said, the water hen blower was heavily dubbed. It was never sparsely dubbed. But we modern fly tyers, we like our sparse dubbing. And now get your hackle and just pin it up and take your silk in front of the hackle and just take 3 turns now. And you'll see people sometimes will hackle the fly and then run the silk through the hackle. But if you're like I am, I'm right-handed, so I'm gonna wrap my hackle in a clockwise direction, and my silk's going in a clockwise direction. So in reality, that silk only ever crosses that hackle at the final turn. It's always following in the groove of the hackle. So you're not in any way binding down that hackle. You just make it a bit unneater. So always bring your silk to the front of the eye, to the front of the hook, in front of your hackle, and then wrap your hackle. And now, how many hackle turns you want is entirely up to you. If you've seen the large dark olives, you'll see that the big, quite cumbersome flies. So I like to take 3 turns of hackle, which has just broken everybody's 2-turn rule. But I'll go again. And then come in with your silk. And trap that hackle down. Now, I'll just take that. I personally take 2 turns of thread on top of the hackle, and then I bang one right in the front. It's kind of a belt and braces effect. And then cut off your hackle stalk. If you want to add some varnish, you can, but I don't, and I just come in with a 2 or 3 whip finish. And there's a water hem blower. And if you want to just get your fingernail and just ping that there. And that is probably more or less a traditional style of the water hem blower. Any questions?
If you guys unmute yourselves, ask the question, then
What size hook is that, Rob?
Yeah, what's
Pardon?
the hook?
What size hook is that, please?
That is a size 12, and it's an Arex Dryfly Light Barbless.
Would you say to fish spiders you would dress them on very light hooks rather
Yes. Yeah.
rather than a gauge hook?
Yeah, they're all traditionally, as I say, they're dressed to imitate mature insects. So light wire hooks, dry fly hooks are the best.
Right, thank you.
Some dress them on heavyweight hooks, but that's kind of defeating the original. Yeah.
What was the hackle, please, Rob?
The hackle was an undercovert from a water hen or a moor hen,
Thank you.
and it's got this dark, smoky grey colour to it.
Yes, thank you.
Some people substitute it for coot, but coot is a lighter grey. This is more or less that gunmetal grey. And when you see the large dark olives, you know that's the shade that you're looking for.
Thank you.
Any more? Right, I'll pop that out. So that was a size 12. So now I'm going to come in with a size 14. So let me, there. So this next pattern is called sometimes called the early red, sometimes the winter brown, sometimes the early brown. And it's one of those peculiar patterns that you get in the North Country catalogue that's got a hurl head, peacock hurl head. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tie 2 hurl head flies, and I'll show you the difference in technique between them both and how the technique and how you mount the hurl impinges on how you dress the fly. If I can find some peacock hurl. There we go. So what you often hear when people are dressing spiders with peacock hurl is that they say that you should use the hurl from the peacock eye, from the eye of the feather. Well, that's nonsense. You can use any peacock hurl. You just got to make sure you pick a decent one, which looks like I'm not doing here. So here's my peacock hurl, and I'll trim that waist end off. Now, when you look at the hurl, hopefully you can see that one side of that hurl is longer than the other side. So when you mount it in, you want to dress it so that longer hurl is always on the outside. So when you dress it, that hurl splays longer, you get a longer splay, and it works better. Plus, of course, you probably can't see it from here, but the hurl has got a slight curvature to it, like up normal feathers have got that curve. So you want to use that curve as well. So the curve wants to be facing back towards the hook shank, so that then when you start to dress the fly, it gives you a more denser finish to the hurl head. Sometimes when you mount it in, of course, if you've got a different hurl one, the hurl's longer on the other side, you have to wrap the hurl in the opposite direction you would normally do. But this one, hopefully, should work in a clockwise fashion. So the silk I'm going to use is, this is just a vintage Purcell's. It's an orange. Probably a gold would be today's color shade. Some of them were dubbed. I'm going to dub this one as well. So what I'm going to do is I come directly behind the eye of the hook, and I'm going to trap my silk down with 5 tight turns, and then I'm going to cut the waist end off. And now I'm going to take my peacock curl, and I'm going to mount that in directly behind the eye of the hook. Dance on the spot a couple of times, and then bring your silk back about 4 turns back from the eye and trim off that waist end. So now we've got to judge which way this hurl's going to go. So taking it up, is it going to twist on me? No, we're all right. So now I'm dressing it with that long side of the hurl upwards, and I'm dressing it in a clockwise manner. So you might not be able to see it, but that hurl now, the nap of the hurl is starting to create a nice head to the fly. And you can stroke them back if you want. Oop, come on. Once you're happy with the size of the head, come in with your silk and just trap it down with 3 nice tight turns. Trim off the waist end. And now we're looking for a woodcock hackle, which are these. There we go. And you see these beautifully barred feathers here. These are the ones that you want. And what we're going to do is, to make it even more complicated, is when we take that hackle, we've got a good size one. Like so. That's the outside of the bird, which is slightly browner, but we're going to dress it with the inside, which is slightly lighter, hopefully. So to prepare the hackle, simply come in and get a nice little tag like that. Now, what I'm going to do with this one is I'm going to strip one side of the hackle. And because I'm a right-handed tire and I'm going in a clockwise direction, I stripped the underside of the hackle, which means that then when I wrap it, that bare stem there is my leading edge, and that's going to give me a better looking hackled fly. So I'll just trim that tag end down, like so. And come in with your finger and thumb and get that hackle as close behind that hurl head as you can. And then simply come in with 3 or 4 nice tight turns. And I say 3 or 4 nice tight turns for a reason, because I stripped one side of that hackle, I'm going to take 3 or 4 turns of hackle. So now when I start to wrap the hackle, it's going to finish, hopefully, where my thread is there waiting for me. So come in with your hackle pliers. And start to wrap that hackle. And you take your turns of hackle, get it right tight in behind that whole head, and take nice, even, and symmetrical turns of hackle. I've got a couple trapped, but I'll get them out of the way in a minute. There you go. And you can see now, because I've stripped one side of the hackle, I'm taking the extra turns, which then brings me to my 4 or 5 turns of silk where it was waiting for me. Then trap your hackle down with 2 or 3 nice tight turns and snip off the end. Brush your hackles over the eye just to get them out of the way. I've got a stream on there, turn over that. And now in tight touching turns, come down your hook shank to a point somewhere between the point of the hook and the end of the barb, which is about there, I'd say. Now, this one is, I think it's Lister's pattern, and he dubs his fly, and he dubs it with this, which is the fur from a fox's ear. I used to use Alsatian, but the dog started to get upset. So I got some foxes here, but I got a full fox, but that's a random story if ever there was one. So you want this ruddy brown dubbing here. And you can get hair poll fur. It's not quite as reddish, but it's on the similar vein. So you can use the fur taken from between a hare's ears. And then you just take a decent amount of dubbing. And because it's got a long staple, you can't really see it. The fur's got a long staple, so you don't need to wax your thread because the staple of the fur does it for you. You see there, there's no wax involved. Just sticks on beautifully. And now just come back up the body of the fly. That's a bit, so I'll just tighten that one up. Right to where your hackle's waiting for you there. And you see this on all the North Country patterns, that the hackles are finished directly behind the flies are finished directly behind the hackle. Never finished in the front. They're always finished behind because they were dressed on blind-eyed hooks. And, a size 14 or size 16 and then a size 18 blind-eyed hook. Trying to do a whip finish, which right at the end, which you can't, is practically impossible, especially when you're tying in your fingers. So they would finish the fly behind the hackle. So it's literally 3-turn whip finish, and we're in. And then just spread those hackles back. Come on, give the old hook a ping, and there you have a winter brown. Any questions? No questions at all. Oh. It's going to be a quick evening, is this?
Everybody's on mute, Rob.
All right, go on then.
If anyone's wondering where you get fox ears from, you obviously get it from a fox, but
You beat me to it there.
Steve Keeper always keeps the ears.
Well, I asked him years ago to get me a fox's face And he said no, because they smell, and yeah, they do smell. But I have a cousin who's a gamekeeper, so I get random things coming through the letterbox occasionally, much to my wife's displeasure.
Well, let's hope you're not away when he shoves it through and you come back 4 weeks later.
Oh, he once rang me up and said, oh, I've got some fox's ears for you. And I says, oh, that's fantastic, that. He says, there's a very well-known fish and chip shop near us, well, it used to be, called Harry Ramsden's in Guiseley. And he says, I'll meet you in the car park at Harry Ramsden's Sunday morning, 9 o'clock. So, okay, so he arranged it. And then this was on a Saturday. And my car was in for a service on the Saturday. And then the garage rang me up at 4 o'clock and said, oh, I'm sorry, we haven't, your car's got some callback on it, and it's not going to be ready on Monday. So I asked for a courtesy car, and too late, we can't get you a courtesy car. So I had to go and pick these foxes' ears up. I had to catch the bus to Guiseley, which is like half an hour away from me. And I got to my cousin Ian, and he's there in his Land Rover. And I've got a rucksack. I've got my son's rucksack that he used to take to school. And he says, "Oh, I've got you some water hen. I've got you a curlew. I've got you some pheasants and some grouse and everything else." So then I said, "Well, what about the fox's ears?" He says, "Oh, there's a problem with the fox's ears." And I said, "Well, what's the problem?" He says, "It's still attached to the fox." So I thought, "Oh, bloody hell!" And there in the back of the Land Rover, in this black bin liner, was the fox. Had been in his freezer for about 6 months with two legs sticking out of the bin bag. So I had to somehow stuff it into my son's rucksack, then get on the bus with these two foxes' legs stuck out of the rucksack. This fella had a Jack Russell dog on the bus, and that Jack Russell dog was going absolutely nuts, probably because of the smell of the fox. Yeah.
They do stink, don't they?
They do, yeah. So my wife doesn't appreciate Ian's knock on the door occasionally and these nefarious objects coming through the letterbox.
You got more chance of catching a fox in the towns these days than you have the country.
Yeah. I mean, the one he got was absolutely beautiful. It was, when I took it out of the bin line and put it on the kitchen table, well, she wasn't very happy about that, but he looked absolutely beautiful. He looked beautiful. Right, so the next one is a similar hurl head one. Let's see if I can find some wire. Yeah, we'll go with this one. And this is the Royal Charlie, which people have kind of forgotten about this fly. And then I put it in my book, and then I don't know why the Americans seem to have taken a love, a shine into this one. And the Royal Charlie, sometimes it's called the Black Drake, is found in many North Country lists, even up as far as Cumbria and Westmoreland and County Durham and Northumberland. It's in lists up there. So this one is again size 14 Arex Dryfly Barbless hook. The silk I'm using is again a vintage Purcell's, although other silks are available. And the silk colour is this. If I can do get my
Wine.
There you go. And this is crimson. In the book, for some reason, it looks brighter and redder than it actually was. It might have been an effect of the printing of the pages, but this is a crimson, which for the life of me, I can't remember what number it is. I think it's 15. Is it 15? Yeah, no, 13. Well, that's unlucky. So it's a number 13 in the Purcell's shade card, but you can get a uni which is similar to this as well. So this is crimson. Now, hopefully I can get that back there. So now what I'm going to do is, instead of tying the hurl head first, I'm going to tie the hurl head at the end. And this is an example of how when you mount the hurls in first, and the methodology of mounting the hurl in first and then the hackle changes to when you tie the hackle and the hurl in last, because you've got to leave yourself now a gap to the eye of the hook. So if I tied it in straight in there, directly behind the eye of the hook, I'd get a large head to the fly, and I don't want that. And I know that when I take my wraps of hurl, I'm going to wrap about 4 hurl wraps. So I want to be 4 hurl wraps back. And then, of course, I've got my hackle. So my hackle is going to be probably another 2 turns, maybe 3. So I want to be back from that eye. I want to be about 4 or 5 turns of silk back, because this will keep the bulk down at the head of the fly. And now, because I'm not dubbing it, I can use that tag end of silk now as a guide for my silk wraps. So now that, if you keep it taut, it gives you a nice silk underbody, because you're using that silk as a guide, and each individual turn of silk is jamming against the next one. Now, I always cut my silk off about 3 turns from the end of the body, because no matter how good your scissors are, you always end up with this wispy bit. So now all that wispy bit I'm burying with my last 3 turns, and that finishes me roughly between the point of the hook and the end of the barb. Some people dress them quite long, but I like a small bodied fly. And now's the time to tell you that I've actually dressed it wrong, but never mind. So what I'll do, having said all that, is I'll do what Mr. Edwards always used to do, is I'll take the fly to bits and I'll start again. So again, about 4 silk wraps back from the eye. 1, 2, 3, 4, and I'll go 5. And I'll trap it down with 5 turns of thread. Now, spot the deliberate mistake, I'll come in with my wire. And this is just a Vineyard's fine gold wire. And I trap it in right at the start. Oh, let's do it properly, Robert. Because if I mounted it in, if I'd done the underbody, then mounted it in at the end, you always get this little bump. And you don't want that bump. You want a consistency. Yeah. So now that I've wrapped it in right at where the hackle's going to be wrapped in, you're never going to see that bump, because that hackle's going to bury it. And now, like I did with my thread, I'll use that wire as a guide and simply come down the hook shank in nice, tight, touching turns to a point somewhere between the point of the hook and the end of the barb, which is about there. Now, again, tight touching turns, bring your silk.
Oh, you like the old fuckers? It's me, your fucking nightmare.
Brilliant. Back up the hook shank.
Who the hell was that?
There. Probably from Lancashire.
Thanks, Rob.
So now I've got to a place where I'm going to mount my hackle in, and now I'm going to do my rib. And because I'm right-handed, I'm always going in the clockwise direction. So when I do my rib goes in the clockwise direction as well, because then when at the end, when I'm binding it down, that act of binding it down with a silk in the same direction tightens the rib. Whereas if you went in an opposite direction, sometimes it just loosens that rib on that final turn. So you take your fine gold wire, and in nice, even, symmetrical turns, you rib that fly. And now, as I say, I come over with my silk, which has got 2 nice tight turns, and I always bang one in front. And that, because it's gone in the same direction as the ribbing, is tightening the ribbon. So when I now fret it off, which takes whatever, it's always nice, tight, and bound in. Now, the hackle is a bog standard partridge hackle, partridge back hackle. But of course, you can see here that partridge hackles, there's nothing bog standard about a partridge hackle. In the manuscripts, on numerous manuscripts, it says speckled instead of barred. And you can see here, there's no barring in that hackle. And I got another one here. It's got that speckle. You don't get that brown bar across it. Now, people always say, where do you get the hackles from? So if I can just get that back. This is obviously a partridge back. In fact, what I'll do is I'll go onto a different camera. So this here is your partridge back. And you can see the barred hackles, everybody uses these here. But if you want hackles that don't have the bar in, what you've got to do is you've got to fold your wing back. And they're really tight. There's like a run of hackles on the side between the back and the wing and the crease of the wing. And that's where you get the ones that aren't barred. You don't get many, but they're all here, really tight to where the wing is. Do the trout? No, probably not. But you know, when you're as fastidious as I am, you got OCD. You pick, so you pick the ones right tight in. Now, see if I can change my. Right. So that's the hackles you want. You want them right tight in the wings. Right. So because I've tied, well, because I'm going to tie the hurl in last, as I say, and we've done it correctly, we've left ourselves enough room to take a turn or 2 or 3 or 4 of hackle. So now, of course, I've got to judge whether I want to strip one side of the hackle or whether I want to dress it in its normal guise as 2 hackles. So what I'll do is I'll tie it in one and I just snip that end off and it leaves us that tag. Now, because I'm ineffectively only going to take 2 or 3 turns of 2 or 3 wraps of hackle, I've just got enough now because I'm like 4 turns behind the eye. I've got enough for my 2 turns of hackle, and I've got enough then to mount in the hurl head without encroaching on the eye of the hook. So again, where that silk is finished, trap that down with 3 or 4 turns and bring your silk to the eye of the hook. And as I said earlier, the technique of winding your silk through the hackle, if you're winding in the same direction, if your silk's going in the same direction as your hackle, meaningless, because you only ever cross over that hackle with your very final turn. So why waste turns of silk? Bring your silk right to the eye of the hook. And now taking your hackle You can brush them back in between turns and take 2 or 3 nice turns. So, and if you really want to be fastidious, you can, if you can get hold of it, half strip your hackle between turns. So not only now, you know, you can get to the point where you can really judge the hackle, because you've got 2 turns there, which are full turns of hackle, and I've got a half a turn there, if I can do it. Come on.
Nice save.
Which I try my best. My heart will stop beating. Oh, you said it too soon there, Derek. Let's go. Let's go again. Try again. Try this one. Come on. So as I say, when when you're dressing your hackle, you take that first turn and you take your second turn, and sometimes you think to yourself, well, do I take a half a turn? Or, what you can do is mid hackling, you can just strip off a few hackle fibers as you start to go. Come on. Gotcha. I mean, so as I say, now take your hackle. If you want to brush them back, you can. And you want a nice, even tension. I'm having a good success with these parties. Come on. You want a nice, even tension on your hackle plier, and you want to wrap your hackle so one turn goes immediately in front of the other. Once you're happy with the density of the hackle, just come in, and my mantra is 2 on top and 1 in front. And now there we go. I'm sweating now. So now we're coming in with a hurl head, and again, just trim off that tip, and we've got his hurl ready for mounting. Now, this is where it gets tricky. You can, if you want, darken the silk with a marker, with a black marker pen, so you're not seeing the silk in front of the eye of the hook, which is my bugbear. But I've got this stuff here, which is Syntron thread, and I think it's something like 40O, and it comes in 2 strands, so I separate the strands so it's even thinner. And the beauty of this is, which I'll probably shoot myself in the foot, is it's quite elasticity to it, so it's softer, and you've got less chance of a breakage because it's got that elasticity. So now what I do is I come in with my Syntron thread and I trap down my original tying thread. Now, moving the Syntron out of the way, I cut my tying thread off. And now I take my peacock hurl, and again I judge where the nap of the hurl is and where the longer part is, and I make sure that that long part is mounted in so it's on the top. occasionally it'll twist on you, but you can always wrap it in a different direction. But where we're going to go? We're going to go. Ooh, yes. And now take your hurl. And start to form a hurl head. It's up to you how many turns you want and how dense a head you want. But once you're happy, come in with your little magic thread and start to trap it down. And again, 2 on top, 1 on front. And come in with your whip finish and just bang a whip finish in there. And because it's absolutely minute thread, you can put 5 or 6 whip finishes in there. He's never going to see it. It's almost invisible. I don't generally varnish the heads of my flies. I just keep them as they are. A good whip finish will keep its integrity, shall we say. And there we've got a Royal Charlie.
Nice.
And it's a fantastic grayling pattern, even though it's not down on the list as a grayling pattern. I've had some fantastic grayling with this one. I think it's that combination of the crimson silk and the gold wire, which you probably can't see from there, can you? Because of the camera. But...
Rob, is that Syntron? Is it a sort of GSP type of thread?
Yes.
Right.
I got it from Trout Line EU.
Right, Line EU. Okay, thank you.
And they got Syntron thread. I can't remember whose. I think it's Hens. I think it's a Hens thread. And
okay.
It comes in 2. When you see it on the spool, it's in two strands.
Yeah.
So I get a little drill bit and separate the strands. They do it in black as well as white.
Would that be the same as the spider web?
Yeah. It's got more of a stretch than spider web. Spider web can be a bit brittle, but this has a nice stretch to it. So when you're a bit cack-handed like me, you can get away with it.
Thank you.
So this next one is an easy one. This one's going to be the Dark Watchet, and it's the use of two threads, which are obviously not twisted, but done in tandem. And the watch it kind of, blowers, it is said a blower is the colour of the sky before it's going to rain, and a watch it is a lighter bluish shade of grey. But when you see some of the patterns dressed with, some of them dress them with starling hackles, some of them dressed with black hen hackles. Well, that darker shade of lighter shade of grey kinds of disappear because they're using the wrong hackle. So what you want to use is Jackdaw throat hackles, and says the man that's looking for a Jackdaw throat hackle. You'll know that Jackdaw throat hackles are really, really delicate hackles to use. I'm going to have to see if I can pick a decent one out of this one.
Size 14 again, Rob?
Pardon?
Size 14 again?
Yeah, size 14. I generally tie it on a 16, but if I tie it on a 16, you probably won't see it as well. Again, an Arex Dryfly Light hook. It's important for it to be a light hook. The Dark Watchet is an imitation of the I've lost my brain. The iron blue, supposedly. I'm not quite sure. I think it's a bit light for an iron blue. And what they generally do is we use two. What we always do is we use two threads. We use a purple and an orange. And if you read Peter Gathercole's book, he tells you to dub the orange. But I'm sorry, Peter, you're wrong. You should be dubbing the purple, because you finish with the orange at the head of the fly. And if you dub that, you're always going to get a bit of dubbing left. You're never going to get a clean silk. So if you dub the purple, of course, that's where you get a better looking fly, because you cut off the purple at the end and you're left with a head which is orange. So to dress this one, again, a couple of silk whips behind the hook eye and trap that down with 3 or 4 nice tight turns. Now we take us purple silk, and we mount our purple silk in. And then, of course, we can use the purple silk as a guide for fashioning our fly body. Simply just keep it taut and follow yourself down with your orange thread. Take one more, right? Yeah, I'll take it up. There you go. So somewhere between the point of the hook and the end of the barb. Now, what I'm going to do is, some people you'll see them touch dub it, but you know, touch dubbing doesn't last very long. It washes away quite quickly. So I'm not a fan of touch dubbing. So what I'm going to do is, again, take my water wrap, and I'm going to come in and I'm going to dub the purple, not the orange. And I want it quite sparse. And this is where you see in the manuscripts where they say twisted, and it isn't twisted. Twisted seems to be more or less a Yorkshire colloquial term for wrapped. So what you're going to do is best bet is to get the purple silk and the orange silk in between your finger and thumb. And then when you wrap the two silks together and you find them starting to twist, you can just untwist them by moving your thumb and finger, and you'll get a nice segmented look. And again, keeping those silks nice and tight together. And that's a trick, is getting them tight.
I find using a proper water wrap for these two is so much easier than using the mole.
Yeah, because it's got a longer staple to it.
Yeah.
Yeah. The longer hairs, you don't need any dubbing wax at all. It just goes on perfect. So once you get to where your hackle's going to be, come in with your orange silk, drop it down. As I say, I always do 2 on top, 1 in front, and cut the purple. And now, if you've got too much hackle or too much dubbing, we can start to tease it out. Right?
Nice.
And you can see there, you've got a segmentation, a more segmented look rather than a chevron style. So now we're going to come in with our Jackdaw. If I can find a small one.
This is the hardest feather I've ever had to hackle.
Don't say that, Peter. Don't say that. So there we have the obligatory Jackdaw. See if I can get a better one. A bit bigger, a bit too big now. You don't want to see the mess that's outside of this. Oh no, we'll go with the original. Right? We'll go with that one. So let's take the fluff off. I used to dress this with fieldfare rump feathers. The fieldfare rump was a lighter grey than the Jackdaw, and it gave a better looking fly. Obviously, you can't get fieldfare hackles anymore. But the problem with a fieldfare hackle is it's even worse than Jackdaw throat hackles. You just look at it and it just falls apart. So, having used something that's even more delicate, you would think that would be reasonably good with this one. So we'll find out. Again, trim that tip off. I've just blown about 40 feathers all the way over my desk now. Shorten my silk. And then come in and trap him down. 3 or 4 nice tight turns. I think I've got a bit there on the edge of somewhere. And now is the time you need a really good pair of hackle pliers. So come in with your hackle pliers, trap it down, and try your best not to pull. Is he gonna twist on me? Yeah, no, I might be all right. And then literally, because the hackles are so soft, you can brush them out of the way quite easy. And come in, and I like them, as I say, I like them fairly well hackled. And that's 3 turns of hackle there. Trap him down, 2 on top, 1 in front. Do turn whip finish. There you go.
Nicely done.
A Dark Watchet. And as I say, you can't see it because my light's not brilliant, but you get a segmented look to the fly. And you don't twist the silks. Some people would do the body in an orange silk and then rib it with a purple silk. But after a couple of trout, that purple silk has gone, and you're just left with an orange fly. So, like all dubbing techniques and all fly tying is don't open your thread wraps. Keep those thread wraps nice and tight together, and then you get a better looking fly and a longer lasting fly. Any questions?
Is it just the Jackdaw that it always looks shit on the hackle quite often?
Yeah, yeah. As I say, because I've got a vintage. Well, I've got several vintage fly tying collections, and I loved the field fair rump. Give it slightly lighter, and it lied better. You know, when you were when you were wrapping it. But you could, I suppose, you could do it with a very webby light hen hackle. Some people also use. I think some of the dressings also use coot overcovered, which wouldn't be as wispy. But I think Jackdaw's the one to do. Any more questions?
Rob, in the fly that's in your book from my collection, the Watchet that's in your book,
yeah,
that doesn't appear to be Jackdaw. That appears to be coot or perhaps water hen. Take a look at that sometime.
I actually think it's field fair.
Field fair, okay. Because it does not look like Jackdaw.
No, it's grayer, isn't it? A grayer Bloa.
It's grayer, yeah.
Yeah. I think that's field fair.
Yeah, okay.
I could always invite myself back over to the United States of America and have another look at those flies, you know.
You're welcome anytime.
So this last one is an example of what people forget about North Country spiders, and that is that they were winged as well as hackled. Let's see if I've got a thing. Yeah. So might not work for our time with us. But every hackled North Country spider there's a winged one. And people forget, you know, if I I show people my spiders and they've got wings on them, they look at me as I'm mad, and they say, "No, that's not a spider." But these are, if I can get it in, these are traditional North Country spiders. These are from the 1820s, and you can see winged spiders, which people always forget about. And so on many of the patterns that you get, you've got a winged version. There's a water hen blower there, and there's a winged version of the water hen blower. You have winged versions and hackled versions. And for some reason, I think it's round about Pritts' time when Pritt writes his book, the winged versions kind of disappear off of the scene. But the winged spiders are absolutely deadly on their day. And the one that I like is called the Dark Blower, which again is a strange one because you look in the old manuscript, the Dark Blower's from Pritt's book, but he's got the wrong fly. He's named it wrong. If you look at the Dark Blower in all the manuscripts, they're similar to a water hen blower. It's a winged water hen blower. What Pritt's calling the Dark Blower is actually Broughton's point. And so I'm going to address you the Broughton point. Now, the silk is this, which is a dark claret. Some people dress it in purple, but you see the old lists and it's a very dark claret. Uni do a similar thread. I think theirs is a claret as well, and it's more or less the same shade. So if you can't get Purcells or can't get other silks, this dark claret from Uni will do. So the hook again is a size 14, and I like to dress I'm contrary when it comes to dressing winged flies. I have my own little foible of how I dress them. So this is it. So coming with my silk, and again, a couple of wraps back from the eye, I trap it in. And now ordinarily people would start to pop the wings in, but I don't. I just pop the wing in last, and you'll see why. So now with that tag end of silk, come down in nice tight touching turns, to a point somewhere between the point of the hook and the end of the barb. And then I leave it 2 wraps short, cut my silk off, and then finish with my last 2 wraps, which is about there. And now, again, in nice, tight, touching turns, I bring that silk up to where I want my wing and my hackle to start, which is, I'll go about there. Now, if I can find a hackle, so the hackle is just general black hen. This is a genetic one. Thank you to Mr. John Shaner of many years ago. Like so. And you've got to really judge how long you want your hackle to be. So I like them to be long. So I start stroking back those hackle fibers so I get a length that I'm happy with. So I'm happy about there. So I'll strip them off. Cut that. And like you would do a dry fly, you would just tease out a couple of those hackles so it leaves you with a leading edge like that. And now, contrary to all fly tying thoughts, I will bang that hackle in first. Like so. That's 4 nice wraps of silk. And now I come back a couple of wraps. And now I'm looking at my wing. So the wing is, in the recipes, I think it's either blackbird or starling. So I'm going to use 2 starlings, secondaries. These are secondaries. You can use primaries, and you can even go down to the third, but I'll go 2 secondaries. And I like to put both feathers together so that, you know, they're opposite slips, so that they meet together, so that that curve of the feather will then curve into the next feather. And rather than cut one slip out of one, then put it on your desk, and then cut another slip out of another one, and then try to match them up, what I do is I bang the two feathers together, come in with my scissors, and I cut them both at the same time. So now my feathers are always together. If you put the, you know, if you cut them out singularly, put them on your desk, and then, you know, you fart around with one side of the feather, then you've got to fart around with the other side of the feather. They tend to split. So just keeping them one is a way to stop them splitting. Now, I always take probably 2 or 3 times as much feather as I want, or slip as I want, because I'm always going to end up, you know, when, even despite how sharp your scissors are, you're always going to end up with 1 or 2 mangled ends. So now I come in with my bodkin and I fret away from both the top and the bottom, and I start to equal that wing. Take that back out. So now I'm left with my wing slips. And now I judge the length that I want. And I sit them directly on top of the hook shank, and I come in with 1 turn and I trap it down. And then the next turn is a bit tighter still. And there you've got it. Luckily for me, bang on.
Perfect. That's a nice handy tip, that is, Rob.
Yeah, just keep them together. The more the more you split them and start messing around with them, the more they're going to go on you. And I'll say that using starling, blackbird, if you've got snipe capes, water hen capes, use the primaries and secondaries off of them for your wings. You know, the better than mallard. Mallard's too stiff and too dense. You know, a natural insect's wings you can see through them, which you can through these, whereas mallard you can't. So now that I've got my wing in, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do, contrary to everybody else, is I use now my hackle to pop my wing up. So I take my turns of hackle directly behind that wing. This works for dry flies as well as wet flies. And once I'm happy where it's going to be, just tease it out a little bit. And then I bang 2 turns of hackle in front. Come in with time, Fred. Trap it down. And a lot of people go on about Clydestyle flies and the winging of Clydestyle flies. But in reality, I'm going to upset a lot of Scottish people now. There is no such thing as a Clydestyle fly. This method of winging and the style of wing is ubiquitous across, the whole northern counties of England and into the Scottish borders. That's not to say that there aren't flies peculiar to the Clyde. There are particular dressings to the Clyde. But this style of winging, if you look at all the old manuscripts, and I've got 40 odd North Country manuscripts, that's the style of winging they're using, which is exactly the same as the Clydestyle wing. So my argument is that there's no such thing as a Clyde style fly. I'm going to get hate letters now from Scots, but there you go. Chop him down with a nice whip finish. Trim it off, and there you've got a traditional Broughton's point. And it's the same way I dress my my Greenwells, in the same manner, putting the hackle in first and then using the hackle to pop my wing up. Any questions? I've put you all to sleep.
No, they're still there.
Oh. So what I'd thought I'd do is, I always get asked about substitute hackles, and it's a thankless task talking about North Country flies and substitute hackles. But what I would do is I'll suggest some good hackles to use, or good hackles to hunt out. And this one here, as if we can get that lower down a bit, is American woodcock. Right now, the beauty of the American woodcock is when you look at the undercoverts here, and everybody's looking for landrail feathers or corncrake, you've got them here in the American woodcock. They're just not quite as gingery. Well, they are actually. So there you got your perfect substitute for landrail. Also, you've got these speckled overcoverts here, and probably can't see it, but there are dressings in the North Country canon that ask for things like wren tail feathers. Well, you've got them here.
Rob,
Yeah.
The only problem with American woodcock is that it cannot be bought or sold, being a migratory bird. So the only source is if you know someone who shoots.
Ah,
So
you need
that
to.
can be a tough one. It's actually quite uncommon even over here,
Oh, right,
unless you know a shooter or
Uh,
are a shooter.
Where did you get yours from, Rob?
Mr. Mike Hogue.
Shh.
Shh. Yeah. Yeah. But pity. That's a pity. But
Yeah,
they,
it's we. I used to shoot, and I know people who still do, and I occasionally will get a couple of pairs of wings, but it cannot legally be traded here.
right then we'll discount your American woodcock.
Sorry about that, guys.
Yeah. And what we're going to do is we'll go to the English woodcock.
Robert.
These are quite getting harder to find now, but they again, if you look around the, if I can get that to focus a bit better. If you start to look around the neck of the bird, and you get these little feathers here. So we've got North Country flies addressed using kestrel feathers and cuckoo feathers, cuckoo breast feathers, and these here, if I can get it to focus, are perfect substitutes because they've got that creamy bar to them. So if you look at some of the old manuscripts and you're scratching your head, have a nice quiet word with Mr. Cooper and get some woodcock hackles. And you see them here again, look. Good for kestrel and cuckoo. The wings, of course, we've got the hackles under the wings for the winter browns and such. You could dye them, I suppose. And if you want the one that everybody wants is the brown owl, I would suggest that you start to get right into the rump section. Not just of an English woodcock, but if you're in America and you've got game birds that you can shoot, you start to look around the rump area of birds. And these are where the really soft hackles are. And you might find you get a few that start to represent owls. So there's a couple of substitutes for you. Also, old Tom Whiting has got these, which for the life of me, I can't remember what they are. Are they Coq de Leon? Can't remember. But this one's a good owl substitute. It doesn't look it when it's together, when it's on the pelt, shall we say. But if you take a hackle off, let's see how focus into that. Yep. And what you would say that doesn't look like an owl feather, but if you do the old trick of stripping one side of the hackle, it starts to get into that coloration of owl. It's not as, the coloration is not as dense, and you're going to sparsely hackle it. So that's a good substitute for an owl. And you can see it's got that chestnut brown look to it. When you're looking at the full hackle itself, it doesn't look like it. But once you strip one side and you lessen that density of hackle, it starts to look good. And that's a whiting hen cape. Any more questions?
Robert.
What about Franklin?
Franklin, yeah, good. Someone gave me Mornell hen pheasant, female Mornell hen pheasant, and that was the closest to a brown owl hackle I've ever seen. But then I realised that the female Mornell hen was actually harder to find than an actual owl, so kind of defeat the object.
Rob, California quail for water hen.
Yeah, yeah. I think I mentioned that in my book, don't I?
Yes, you do. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good one.
It's almost indistinguishable.
Yeah, yeah.
Can you hear me, Robert?
I can.
Right. The French partridge, as an alternative to the American woodcock, if you lift up the wing of the French partridge, there's really soft, dusty orange color hackles.
Yeah, those orange hackles too.
Yeah, they're really soft, sort of creamy, dusty orange color.
Yeah, yeah. Seems like this is a woodcock head, the head of a woodcock. This is the same wonderful little hackles to them. Similar again to kestrel and things like that, which you find. Let me change my. Oh, I'm back. I'm alive. Yeah. So, any more questions? Let me. I mean, there are some North Country flies that use topping feathers from lapwings or peewits, and that's basically just a similar effect to a very short black dryfly hackle. Let's see if I've got some peewits here. And I mean, that's the problem with most of the North Country flies is the use of these really obscure hackles that we can't get anymore. And everybody asks me for substitutes, which, as I said, is a thankless task. What have we got?
I found hooded crow I use quite a bit.
Yeah, I like hooded crow. There's a thrush. Let's see what I've got.
And I got some row, which have got some interesting feathers on the side.
We also have, I'll tell you what, if I can find one, Spanish needles, like Spanish needles and dark Spanish needles. And you see it on manuscripts where they say that there's only 4 feathers on a hackle, on a bird, on either side of the bird. And see if I can get that up there. Is what they're using is this is a starling hackle, and the feathers they say are right tight in here. And what you get is, if I switch the camera again, is people kind of use the wrong hackle. There we are. So this is the underside of the starling wing. And when they say there's only 4 hackles to use, what you find is people are using these here, which have got like a mauve tip to them. And yes, there's probably about 8 or 9 under a bird's wing. Let's see if I can find a good one. Similar to that one there. And these are quite light, but when you look at the the stoneflies and the wings of the stoneflies are quite dark. So what people are using these are actually using the wrong ones. What you've got to do is you've got to peel the wing right back and then peel the normal hackles back. And what you find is, if you can get into them, is these that are darker, which are here. You see there's 4 there. And they're just appreciably, a couple of shades darker. So when you're dressing Spanish needles and you're looking for the elusive 4 hackles, there they are. These here, the darker. And you see some photographs online where they've used particular hackles. They're using the wrong hackle. It's not until you're a bit mad like me that you collect all these weird hackles. Any questions? Well, that's about it then.
Magic.
Thank you, Rob. Very interesting evening.
Can I? Well, I'd like to finish on one last point, if I may, and it's. I went to Oliver Edwards's funeral last year, and it kind of struck me that in these times when everybody seems to be, an endorsed pro fly tire or a social media fly tying expert, that we should really take time out to appreciate the true experts. People who have taken decades to hone their craft as fly tyers, because these guys have got an integrity and a value. Because of their, knowledge that have accumulated over decades, a knowledge that is worth largely now disappearing because of social media. So, especially in this little niche area where we had the great Oliver Edwards in his day, North Country Flies, we should take time out to appreciate people like Stuart Bowden, John Shaner, who's been on here, John Glynn, who I know is here. Because their craft as fly dressers and the knowledge that they've accumulated over years is priceless nowadays. Because we're all turning to the social media stuff, and we're not feeling the love to the old boys that have still got that knowledge. So that's my bit of politics out of the way.
Well, we're also very influenced by you as well, Rob.
Well, I won't go that far.
No, definitely credit where it's due, Rob. Big influence on me, you.
Oh, no. Well, thank you.
No.
Stuart Bowden's the influence on me.
Yeah.
Cheers for tonight, Rob.
Not a problem. I hope you enjoyed it all.
Yeah, very much so, Rob.
Good
Thank you, Rob. Yeah,
Thank you.
brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you. Very interesting.
I'll have the digestives off of Mr. Craig in a couple of months.
Thanks, Rob.
Thank you very much.